more pressure on our own government officials to bring the people who've caused this immoral war in Iraq to how about we bring them to court and prosecute them and put them in jail and try diplomacy around the world so that we can get into better standing with the rest of the world. This is a shame. And anybody who could vote for Hillary Clinton or any other one of these people who would go to war should... I can't believe that the United States is on this footing. We've got to stop our own government, and we've got to be more diplomatic with the rest of the world.
Pittsburgh, what kind of diplomacy are you talking about with regard to dealing with Iran?
Well, you know, it's common knowledge that we don't want to talk to people. I mean, how about if we would talk to Iran? They didn't do anything to us. And yet here we are wanting to start a war. And the only reason we want to start a war is, one, it's a geopolitical war, that we want to take over that part of the world. But the other thing is Bush and Cheney and Rice, they all want to save their necks because they got us into a war by lying. And they're lying again. They're fudging evidence again. And they're not being held accountable. Our lawmakers, we made a statement in November. We want this to end. What's going on? It's not ending. Our own lawmakers are letting us down.
Vieira, Florida, on our line for independence. Good morning.
Good morning, Rob. How you doing?
Just fine.
I've been calling for years. Finally got through.
Congratulations. What do you think about U.S. strategy and policy in dealing with Iran? Should we put more pressure on them now?
Oh, absolutely. I'm reading a book right now called The 1% Doctrine by Ron Suskind. It's about our pursuit of terrorists since 9/11, and we should absolutely put more pressure on Iran. You know, it's Bush and Cheney should have never got us into this war. It was a mistake, but you know, we have to do what we have to do now. So.
Thanks for your call. More from the article by Jay Solomon in Washington and Yochi Dreesen in Baghdad. They write that there are signs this escalating pressure is having some effect on Iran and opening opportunities for advancement in U.S. foreign policy, whether containing Iran's nuclear ambitions or underpinning a democratically elected government in Lebanon. But rather than seeking a quick fix to the contest against Iran, Bush administration officials say they are bracing for a long struggle to curb Tehran's influence in the region. Quote, "We are convinced that sooner or later the cost will be so high that they, the Iranians, will have to come to the negotiating table," said Nicholas Burns, the State Department's point man in Iran. "I don't believe a conflict with Iran is inevitable. We've got time." U.S. efforts to confront Iran are driven by decades-old fears that the Islamic Republic will seek to export its anti-American revolutionary doctrine across the Middle East. Iran's growing influence in the region also could further embolden Islamist militias like Hezbollah and Hamas fighting Israel and imperil U.S. access to Mideast energy reserves. Back to the phones, Chevy Chase, Maryland. Good morning and welcome to the Washington Journal.
Good morning.
Is it time to start putting more pressure on Iran?
No, it isn't. The United States should get rid of its nuclear weapons, and all countries should pursue that avenue, and then all other countries who are perceived to be arming themselves will not do that.
Rapid City, South Dakota, on our line for Republicans. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Yes.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine. What do you think about the twofold approach that they're writing about in the Wall Street Journal?
Oh, I don't know too much about that, but I would believe that we need to stand fast and confront all of our enemies, even the ones that are publicly wanting the destruction of American people and other countries that have our ideals like freedom of speech and, you know, all our freedoms. That's one thing that I guess they don't understand is people are free to do whatever they want in this country within reason. But I believe that we just need to confront our enemies where they stand and just deal with the consequences later.
Thanks for your call. Kansas City, Missouri. Good morning and welcome to the Washington Journal. Kansas City, are you with us? Yeah. Well, let's try Frederick, Maryland. Good morning. Hello? All right, we're going to go back to the article in the Wall Street Journal. The administration has sought to stoke international opposition to President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad by increasingly choking off his country's ties to global economy. White House officials say Tehran's business and clerical elite are increasingly at odds with the Iranian president's confrontational stance toward the international community on issues like Iran's nuclear program and Israel's right to exist, and they fear his stance could isolate them internationally. The Treasury is moving to exert more pressure on Tehran by imposing financial sanctions on 3 Iranian companies allegedly involved in supporting Tehran's nuclear program. The policy prohibits U.S. companies from doing business with the 3 firms, which are all owned by the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, and freezes any assets they may have in the U.S. Back to the phones in Fort Lauderdale. Good morning.
Good morning.
What do you think about the United States putting pressure on Iran at this point?
I think it's a good idea. I'm wondering why we haven't put more pressure. I mean, any country building nukes and threatening our country, we ought to deal with them sternly. If Reagan were alive, President of Iran probably wouldn't be here right now.
In the Financial Times, the front page story, Iran nears industrial nuclear fuel production. IAEA chief warns Tehran has uranium know-how. Iran has mastered crucial nuclear technology since August and could be 6 months away from being able to enrich uranium on an industrial scale, the United Nations chief nuclear watchdog warned yesterday. In an interview with the Financial Times, Mohammed El-Baradei, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, added that Tehran was overwhelmingly likely to miss a UN deadline tomorrow to suspend enrichment, which can produce fuel and weapons-grade material. He went on to say that U.S. and British intelligence estimated that Iran was still 5 to 10 years away from developing a nuclear bomb, but he added there's a big difference between acquiring knowledge for enrichment and developing a bomb. The UN inspector said Iran could install an industrial-scale capacity of 3,000 centrifuges, enough to begin producing fissile material for a bomb within months. Back to the phones, Madison, Illinois. Good morning.
How you doing? Good morning.
What do you think about the U.S. putting pressure on Iran at this point?
This thing is so upsetting to me because it seems like Bush is trying to kill all the Arab countries. I mean, without reason, he claimed that he thinks the government are sending weapons to Iraq, right? But it's not sure whether or not it's come from the top. That means the intelligence is still faulty, or he's the one who's lying to American people. All you want to do for the rest of this term is to kill all Arabs. Why can't he just say that he's a Christian, he wants to kill all Arab countries? Why do we need to go to Iran? For what?
Thank you. Thanks for your call. Let's move on to Houston, Texas. Good morning.
Morning to you.
Yes, what's on your mind this morning regarding U.S. putting more pressure on Iran?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great.
That's a what?
That would be great. We need to be more pressure for Iran. That's what I need. That would be great because when we leave Iran, that will be more problem in the world because they support all the terrorists.
Thanks for your call. We're going to take a look at some more news, some more items in the newspapers this morning. In the Baltimore Sun, a challenge for spy chief is the headline. New intelligence boss must restore faith, unite agencies, officials say. This is by Siobhan Gorman. She writes, President Bush will swear in the country's second national spy chief today, handing Mike McConnell an unfinished experiment in intelligence reform as wartime intelligence becomes the focus of increasing scrutiny on Capitol Hill and in Washington. There will be an acute need to show results in an endeavor many lawmakers and intelligence professionals say has lagged, and McConnell, a retired admiral and former National Security Agency director, will have less than 2 years to deliver, current and former intelligence officials said. The article goes on to say that as the new Director of National Intelligence, McConnell must tackle two primary hurdles: restoring faith in the quality of intelligence reports and managing all 16 intelligence agencies as one system. Former intelligence officials said it is possible that McConnell could remain as the director during the next presidency. Britow, Pennsylvania, on our line for Independence. Good morning.
Yeah, I think we should give Iran more time and then have more negotiation, to see, I mean, if they have to pressure, to continue to pressure, or if they have to step back, I mean, we have to, more cautious, not to do something like we did, in Iraq, all right?
What kind of negotiating are you talking about? Who gives up what for what?
I think, Bush have to understand that just to face, to have a meeting with the Iran president, so they can meet together and then see, what, he want to say, because, he really wants to face Bush.
We're going to move on to Philadelphia. Good morning and welcome to the Washington Journal.
Yes.
Philadelphia, turn down your television so we don't get that feedback, okay?
Okay, just a minute.
Philadelphia, turn down your television so we don't get that feedback.
Okay. All right. Now, I feel like that the U.S. should go to, should put pressure on Iran.
You're going to have to
in
turn.
Iraq.
We're going to let you go, Philadelphia. Remember, when you give us a call, when you start talking to us, make sure and turn down your audio on your radio or your television so that you don't get that feedback. Kind of confuses you when you're trying to talk to us. We're going to take a break from our discussion regarding U.S. pressure on Iran and looking at the newspapers this morning to check in with Chuck Todd over at Hotline for a look at political news this morning. Good morning, Chuck Todd. How are you?
Good morning. Well, it was a busy weekend, long weekend, and on the presidential campaign trail. We're going to divvy things up this morning. I'm going to do a little report on the Republicans, and my colleague John is going to report on the Democratic side of things. This morning, the big news is that Mitt Romney is going on the air. He's buying his first TV ads in 5 states, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Michigan, and Florida. They're in select markets, so it's not clear that they're statewide in any of the states. They'll likely statewide in Iowa and South Carolina. Those are have the smallest markets. The questionable one is Michigan, Florida, and New Hampshire. Did he buy Boston? Did he buy all those major markets in Florida? We'll be tracking that very closely. But in this ad, it's a bio spot. The 60-second spot calls Mitt Romney a business legend, quote, a guy who rescued the Olympics, and then, quote, turned around a Democratic state. Romney himself is in the ad. Haven't seen video of the ad. We're just going by quotes here. Romney himself says, "This is not a time for more talk and dithering in Washington. It's time for action." So everything about this presidential campaign continues to front load, continues to move up. He's actually not the first presidential candidate to air ads, but he's the first major presidential candidate to air ads. Duncan Hunter aired some ads. The California congressman aired some ads very, very early in the cycle, just in a couple of markets. This Romney, this obviously has to do with name recognition, hoping to boost that name ID up a little bit. McCain and Giuliani are the two dominant figures in Republican primary polls in Iowa, in New Hampshire, pretty much in every state. So Romney's hoping that if he can get on equal footing with them as name ID is concerned, then he can move on and see if he can become the conservative alternative or whatever position he thinks will be best for him for this nomination. Moving on, John McCain had a very busy weekend. In some sorts, almost his coming out weekend, though he hasn't formally announced. He said he is going to announce in March. He acquired a ton of endorsements over the weekend. Frank Keating, former governor of Oklahoma, who himself flirted with a presidential bid. Phil Gramm, the former Texas senator, he was with John McCain all weekend in Iowa, introduced him at events in South Carolina. Frank Keating was in the South Carolina leg. John Thune, the South Dakota senator, he's formally endorsed. And former Senator Mike DeWine has agreed to head up McCain's efforts in Ohio. So a busy weekend for McCain. He did all these things, and then, of course, while campaigning in South Carolina, perhaps the headline of his event is when he called Donald Rumsfeld, quote, one of the worst defense secretaries in history. He said, quote, to a town hall crowd in Hilton Head, "We are paying a very, very heavy price for the mismanagement," that's the kindest word I can give you, of Donald Rumsfeld of this war. The price is very, very heavy, and I regret it enormously. And then he continued, "I think that Donald Rumsfeld will go down in history as one of the worst secretaries of defense in history." Now, McCain being critical of Donald Rumsfeld is not necessarily new, but to be this harsh at a Republican event in South Carolina, a place where he lost his bid for the presidency basically the last time around in 2000, it's an interesting gambit to see what kind of response he gets. He's hoping that those Bush supporters or the conservative Republicans down there in South Carolina also that they may possibly blame Rumsfeld for mismanaging the war and not sort of hold it against McCain that he's being overly critical of a Bush administration official. And finally, we have one straw poll now off the books. The Florida Republican Party announced over the weekend that they will, instead of doing an October straw poll, which is something they've done in previous history, in fact the Democrats down there have done it too, they call it Presidency 3 or 4. I guess this time it's Presidency 4. They even use Roman numerals as if it's the Super Bowl. Well, they're canceling their straw poll and instead having a national presidential debate down there. What's interesting is that there are a lot of Republicans, Florida Republican activists, who are upset that the straw poll's been canceled. They got a huge convention center in order to hold all these delegates. It was going to become one of those delegate ticket buying contests, this or that. And some activists are upset that there's going to be no way to raise money. So there's a possibility, according to this one report we saw in the Miami Herald, there's a possibility that candidates will get charged to participate in the debate, that they may be charged upwards of $100,000. So we'll see how long that lasts. It's sort of odd that a campaign would be charged money, though it's not odd that state parties try to find ways for campaigns to pay for something at a major event. Sometimes it's tables at a dinner, but this would be $100,000 to participate in a debate. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see if they follow through on that.
Definitely interesting to keep an eye on. Chuck Todd at the hotline. Thank you very much.
You got it. Thanks, Rob.
Back to our discussion about U.S. strategy and policy and putting pressure on Iran. We're talking about this based on a couple of articles in various papers this morning. The main article that we've been looking at so far comes from from Wall Street Journal. Twofold approach to Tehran. U.S. strategy in and outside Iran runs risk of backlash, are the headlines. And they write that the largest potential flashpoint between Iran and the U.S. remains Iraq. President Bush pledged to increase efforts to choke off what he says is Iran's funneling of munitions and arms to Shiite militias there. Critics say the White House is overstating Iran's involvement in Iraq's discord, potentially to blame Tehran for some U.S. setbacks. Senior Bush administration officials say drawing red lines in Iraq is crucial to blunting Tehran's ambitions throughout the region. Elsewhere in the Middle East, the U.S. and its allies have intensified proxy battles against Iran in recent weeks. In Lebanon, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia have increased economic and military aid to the government of Prime Minister Fahd Sinora to ward off efforts by Hezbollah, Lebanon's radical Shiite group, which is backed by Iran, to grab more power. The Bush administration has also increased aid to the Palestinian Authority and its leader, Mahmoud Abbas, in a bid to blunt the power of Iranian-funded Hamas. Back to the phones. Bridgeport, Connecticut, on our line for Democrats. Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing, sir?
Just fine. What do you think about the U.S. applying pressure to Iran at this point?
Well, the original plan for the roadmap was in 7 years we were going to go through Lebanon, Iraq, Iran, all the way into Somalia, and it's been obvious that that's been delayed in Iraq, and I think that whether it's indeed proof that Iran has been intervening with weapons supplies to Iraq, it has been a delayed process, and whether it's tactical for that purpose or not, it's ultimately going to have to be the realization of the United States, as an officer from a Korean war once told me, and perhaps more applicable in Iran, in order to prevent, let's say, a nuclear Pearl Harbor, we should use a weapon such as a hydrogen bomb rather than send officers and soldiers in there to try to, I mean, where would you rather use it, in Iraq or, let's say, a hedge in Iran because it's more of an acceptable intellectual society? Because that's the point I want to make. I don't really have anything more to say to that because it seems like there's a lot of tangible factors that are out of my thought process. Thank you.
In the Washington Times this morning, Iran cash lapse puts nuke plan in peril. This is by Vladimir Zakhanov out of Moscow. He says the opening of a Russian-built nuclear power plant in Iran could be delayed because Iran has fallen behind in payments, Russian officials said yesterday. A top Iranian nuclear official swiftly denied that payments had been disrupted in the latest dispute surrounding the deal at the heart of the two countries' nuclear cooperation. Under an agreement reached last year, Russia was to ship nuclear fuel to Bushehr, Iran's first nuclear plant, by next month and open the facility in September with electricity generation to start by November. Tucson, Arizona, good morning and welcome to the Washington Journal.
Yeah, hi, good morning. You know, that Czech guy that gave that political report earlier?
Yes, Chuck Todd.
Chuck Todd. He ought to take Tuesday mornings off, man. You know, but the thing about Iran and the nuclear problem, we are way so wrong on all this. You know, we don't have a clue what's going on. You know, Iran is a good country. They're doing what they can. They're trying to do the best they can. Same as Iraq did. But we got in there and we messed them up anyway. And we're trying to do it to Iran. And we're doing it all because we want to make money for the military-industrial complex. And it's got to stop.
What would you say, what kind of, earlier, one of the callers talked about diplomacy. What kind of diplomacy do you think the U.S. could put in play right now that might get a little bit more cooperation from Iran?
All kinds of diplomacy.
Give me an example.
Foreign aid, technology trade, everything.
Blackwood, New Jersey, good morning.
Hello?
Hello, Blackwood. Is this Blackwood, New Jersey?
No, this is Waterville, New York.
This is where?
Waterville, New York.
Well, go right ahead, ma'am.
To all of the American citizens who have a supremacy Goliath attitude, I want you to know that I pray for President Bush every day that Almighty God will take a stand and give him what he needs in order to be a good leader, because the Bible says that when the one in charge is not being wise, then the whole country suffers. I would hope and pray that we can use diplomacy and not be so greedy and stop not following the 10 Commandments, because if not, we are a doomed nation, because God will take a hand. Thank you very much, and I wish every American citizen a good day, because we're really living in the last days if we're not careful.
Ma'am, why do you say that greed is at the base of this?
Excuse me?
Why do you say that greed is what's driving the decision-making process?
If it were not, there is enough of everything on this earth. Fuel, gold, everything on this earth. There is enough for everybody. But there are some who feel that they can take it at the price of everybody else.
Lemoore, California, on our line for Republicans. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. First of all, I'd like to say that it seems pressure in Iran is, we need that definitely. But it seems that we're moving forward closer towards war with Iran. We've seen, well, there's some estimates that have said that there are explosively formed projectiles in Iraq that are killing American troops that are from Iran. We've captured 2 of their security officers that Iran has admitted are Iranian security officers in Iraq. and it seems with our deployment of aircraft carriers and Patriot missile batteries into Iraq and to the Middle East, that's what the escalation is looking at for. The posting of Admiral Fallon not into the CENTCOM spot seems to show that we're looking for a wider sort of influence in Iraq, in the Middle East right now. And it looks like it'll be not just political pressure on Iran, but actual military pressure.
We get this from the HonoluluAdvertiser.com. Destroyer O'Kane preps for Gulf duty. The Pearl Harbor-based destroyer USS O'Kane practiced, approached, and shipboarding February 7th off Guam as the USS John Stennis carrier strike group prepared to head for the Persian Gulf. The O'Kane is among the ships that will be part of an increased U.S. Navy presence in the Gulf. The Navy previously said the Pearl Harbor destroyer Paul Hamilton would join up with the carrier group. The Stennis Strike Group, which was previously in line to deploy to the Pacific, will augment another task force in the Persian Gulf led by the aircraft carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower. Back to the phones. Alexandria, Virginia. Good morning.
Hello. Good morning. In answer to your question, the answer is no. First of all, I think they have a right to be able to protect themselves against other nuclear powers. First of all, this administration has become too untrustworthy for me. I don't trust them for a bit. They could be faking all this. I'm not sure what kind of evidence they have. Also, we should lead by example. We have at least 1,600 nuclear arsenals that we should start getting rid of. And I also believe that the only way to get rid of these wars is to get rid of this administration. We have plenty of reasons to impeach this president and his vice president. And one of the reasons is that he started a war against an innocent country, innocent in relation to 9/11. So we could question this president and his administration, and if we want to get out of this war, we must impeach this man.
In the Washington Times this morning, Iraq refugee plan faces bipartisan opposition. Bush proposal called contrary to U.S. law. This is by Audrey Hudson. A new program by the Bush administration to admit 7,000 Iraqi refugees into the United States this year is meeting with some resistance on both sides of the political aisle. Representative Tom Tancredo, Colorado Republican, says the policy flies in the face of U.S. law, and Ted Strickland, Ohio's Democratic governor, says refugees are not welcome in his state. In addition to opening U.S. borders to refugees, the United States will contribute $18 million for a worldwide resettlement and relief program for 20,000 Iraqi refugees this year. Roxborough, North Carolina, good morning.
Yeah, hi.
What do you think about the United States putting more pressure on Iran?
Well, everybody that knows anything about history knows that the Iranians have been behind all this stuff forever. You know, they're bad guys. But I think what's more important is if you went to your local gas station and the guy there wanted to kill you, you might want to go to a different gas station. Maybe we need to start becoming more independent in this country with our oil, and maybe get rid of the 11 million immigrants that are using that much more oil, the illegals here in our country.
In the Wall Street Journal, on the front page, soaring energy use puts oil squeeze on Iran. There is less to export as consumers learn to love appliances and cars. This is by Bill Spindle. He writes, a combination of Western sanctions and Iranian policies has discouraged foreign investment in oil fields, causing production to stagnate. The result, Iran's oil exports could dry up in as little as a decade, according to some who have studied the situation. That's a looming disaster for Iran, which derives about 85% of its export income from the sale of oil. The industry is in crisis, says a former Iranian diplomat and national oil company official who heads a London-based consulting company. Back to the phones, and Sullensby, West Virginia. Good morning and welcome to the Washington Journal.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment about Iran. I think the United States and all its allies should bring pressure to bear on them in any way they can to get them to reconsider their position on the need of nuclear weapons. I think this would be beneficial to the whole world, not just the United States. And that is my comment.
Lansing, Kansas, on our line for Republicans. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Yeah, General Petraeus, there's plans already in place to put pressure on Iran with his counterinsurgency doctrine as the battle group comes in to seal off the Strait of Hormuz. We've got to put pressure on Iran. There's no question that Ahmadinejad has made it clear that he would destroy Israel if he gets a nuclear device. We are strategically placed in that theater of operations to take care of that. And the far left, with these resolutions that were passed, are hoisting the white flag. That's sending the wrong message out there. We've got to ensure that we put pressure in that region. And as far as 9/11, we have not been attacked in CONUS, continental United States. The reason is because the battlefields are over there, and we're fighting the insurgency and the terrorists over there, and we're killing a lot of them. And those terrorists that we're killing over there will not make it here, protecting our children and our way of life. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your call. On the front page of the money section in this morning's USA Today, XM Sirius quit head-to-head competition. Rivals plan to merge, but where does that lead consumers? The stories on the front page of the business section of USA Today, along with two charts that sort of give the details of what each of the assets are of Sirius and XM Radio. Also being reported this morning in the business section of the Sirius agrees to buy its sole rival. The $4.57 billion purchase of XM satellite radio combines the only as well. New York-based and Washington-based XM investors will receive 4.6 shares of Sirius common stock for each share they own. Shareholders of each will own about 50% of the combined radio company. And for some reaction to the merger, we go to the business section of this morning's New York Post. Some doubt merger will get past the FCC is the headline. Jimmy Schaefer, head of the consulting firm the Carmel Group, sees this deal suffering a fate similar to the failed merger between EchoStar and DirecTV in 2003. Even with terrestrial radio, iPods, online radio, and wireless devices, quote, there just isn't enough competition to allow this government-mandated duopoly to dissolve within 6 years of its launch, Schaefer said. Already, the National Association of Broadcasters has come out against the pact. For the FCC's part, Chairman Kevin Martin said in January that upon awarding the spectrum licenses to Sirius and XM, a provision was written that prevented one entity from owning both businesses. Martin later added any FCC rule could be changed. Memphis, Tennessee, on our line for Democrats. Good morning.
Good morning from Memphis. Yeah, my comment is I do believe that we need to keep some pressure on Iran. I just think that the approach that the Bush administration takes is a bit awkward, and that their only options on the table have been, from the very start of this war, is to intimidate and use fear and military power. I don't think they're capable of doing any other kind of diplomatic action to make things work out. There's so many other options, and also I think that their sense of reality is a bit skewed in the fact that they think that we have more of a military to give. We have more of a military force to bring to bear on a place like Iran. I mean, that's absolutely wishful thinking. I mean, according to all the experts and all the generals, our military is almost in a broken state.
Memphis, when you say diplomatic options, give me an example.
Well, as far as diplomatic options, I mean, there's any number of things that you can do. I mean, first of all, if we hadn't intimidated half the countries around that area, we'd have people as allies to help us put pressure on Iran. But now, you know, a lot of people have turned against us, and it has narrowed our options. I think that by getting out of Iraq and by slowly pulling ourselves away from that situation, we ease the tension, we get people back on our side, we can have other countries help us out. But right now, we're in a really bad place, and it just keeps getting worse. we're so far ahead of the game by even talking about military options in Iran because of this.
Thanks for your call, Memphis, Tennessee. Justices to revisit thorny issue of sentencing guidelines in first cases after recess. House writes the Supreme Court returns on Tuesday from a month-long recess to face a daunting and urgent task, explaining what it meant 2 years ago when it ruled that the federal sentencing guidelines were to be treated as advisory, no longer binding on federal judges. The decision that dropped that bombshell on the criminal justice system, the United States versus Booker, has not penetrated public consciousness in the way that, say, the Miranda decision on the right side against against the self-incrimination did a generation ago. But in its own way, it has been no less revolutionary, creating turmoil in criminal sentencing. The justices will hear arguments on Tuesday morning in 2 cases that will provide the latest chapter, although almost certainly not the final one in the court's continuing and to many profoundly unsettling reprisal of the roles of juries and judges in criminal sentencing. And if you want to read more about that case surrounding U.S. versus Booker, the article is in the New York Times this morning, as well as other papers on newsstands in your neighborhood. Phoenix, Arizona, on the line for Republicans. What do you think about U.S. applying more pressure to Iran?
I think that U.S. pressure applied to Iran would not be effective due to the fact that any pressure we put on Iran could be overturned by China, because China has oil interests, just like we do. And whatever, we do to them, they'll just go over to China and buy from China instead, or, do trade with China instead. That's all I have to say, sir.
Colonial Heights, Virginia, you're on the Washington Journal. Good morning.
Yes, sir. The guy tried to throw my thunder, the other guy, about the diplomatic front, that we need to bear pressure on Iran. And we do not have any friends in the area, therefore we cannot put any diplomatic pressure on them in the war. Like he said, our army is stretched so thin. I'm a retired military person, and what I see is that it looks like the Republicans constantly want to start a war, regardless how other people in the world see us. They constantly want to beat that war drum, but that is not gaining us anything, because we're the only one in the world. Look like we're always at war with some other country. Look at the rest of the world. Nobody else is at war but the United States of America all the time. They better keep their eye on China. That's what I'd say. Thank you.
2 articles regarding Vice President Cheney in the newspapers this morning. The first from the Washington Post, Cheney's influence, lessons in second term, administration more pragmatic in foreign policy dealing with Congress. They write that mistrustful of North Korea and its willingness to keep promises, Vice President Cheney worked hard in President Bush's first term to prevent talks aimed at halting the country's push to develop a nuclear bomb. At one point 3 years ago, he even bypassed the State Department to intervene in delicate negotiations over Pyongyang's nuclear activities. But this month, Cheney stayed out of the way as a top State Department negotiator wrapped up a nuclear agreement with North Korea, a deal that many of the Vice President's conservative allies consider foolhardy and that some of his own staff are said to find hard to swallow. The contrast underscores the Vice President's shifting status in Washington. There is no evidence that Cheney's close relationship with President Bush has lessened, but there is also little doubt that the causes he championed, a tough skepticism of negotiation with dictatorships such as North Korea and the forceful exercise of presidential authority, are being rethought within the Bush administration, according to officials inside the government and experts outside of it. Also this morning, referring to the trial that's been going on regarding the Vice President's former Chief of Staff that is going on right now, and they're going to be getting into final arguments later on this morning. Trial spotlights Cheney's power as an infighter is the headline, and Jim Rutenberg writes, a picture taking shape from hours of testimony and reams of documents in the trial of Scooter I. Lewis Libby Jr. shatters any notion that the White House was operating as a model of cohesion throughout President Bush's first term. The trial against Mr. Libby has centered on a narrow case of perjury with days of sparring between the defense and the prosecution lawyers over numbing details of 3-year-old conversations between White House officials and journalists journalists, but a close reading of the testimony and evidence in this case is more revelatory, bringing into bolder relief a portrait of a vice president with a free rein to operate inside the White House as he saw fit in order to debunk the charges of a critic of the war in Iraq. Our last call for this segment comes from Toms River, New Jersey. On our line for Independence, what do you think about more U.S. pressure on Iran?
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, our country now could, our stance at this point, we could imagine the amount of money that we could have used at home at this point that had been poured into this war to no effect. Don't forget that we supported Iran for a long time under the Shah of Iran, and that was not a smart thing to do, as you see. And, you know, that could make people use an atomic weapon, or us use an atomic weapon, because the Iranian ground troops would give us a problem on the ground. And I thank you for listening to the comment.
Thank you very much for making the comment. In the Washington Times, agencies clash over meat sandwiches is the headline. This is from the Scripps Howard News Service. In a classic case of Washington bureaucracy, the Food and Drug Administration and the Food Safety Inspection Service of the Department of Agriculture, the two primary agencies responsible for food safety, are locked in legislation over which inspects open-face sandwiches and which inspects closed-face sandwiches. The FDA inspects manufacturers of packaged closed-face meat or poultry sandwiches, those with 2 slices of bread once every 5 to 10 years. The Food Safety and Inspection Service, the FSIS, inspects manufacturers of packaged open-face meat or poultry sandwiches, those with 1 slice of bread daily. You can read more about that in this morning's Washington Times. We're going to check back in at the hotline for more political news this morning with John Mercurio, senior editor over there. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Rob. Chuck Todd brought you some stories over the weekend about the Republican presidential candidates. Let's look now at some of the Democrats who were out there in the field over the weekend. It's not too often that a presidential candidate, especially in the early weeks of the campaign, has time, still sort of introducing himself to the country, can take time out to actually campaign for another politician. Well, that's what Barack Obama was doing yesterday in San Francisco, campaigning for Senator Barbara Boxer, one of his Democratic colleagues in the Senate. Boxer actually isn't even up for re-election until 2010, but she could be facing the possibility of a race against Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, extremely popular right now in the state and likely to raise a lot of money himself. So Boxer's been pretty busy over the campaign fundraising circuit over the past several years, getting ready for the possibility of that race. Now, Boxer, campaigning yesterday with Obama, said she isn't endorsing Obama, that this is not a suggestion, that she's taking sides in the Democratic presidential primary. Says that at this point, at least, she plans to remain neutral. But it was an interesting display for Boxer, of course, a woman elected for the first time to the Senate in the 1992 Year of a Woman, who, for a time, her daughter, Barbara Boxer's daughter, was actually married to Hillary Clinton's brother, Tony Rodham. So there was actually a family connection between Boxer and Clinton. So an interesting display to see Boxer standing next to Hillary Clinton's main Democratic primary, presidential primary rival yesterday in California. Now, Obama, for his part, is going to be staying in California today. He's going to Los Angeles tonight, to Beverly Hills for a big star-studded Hollywood fundraiser that's being hosted by Steven Spielberg, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and David Geffen. This is an event being closely watched, expected to raise more than $1 million, much more actually, I bet, than $1 million tonight in Beverly Hills. We're going to stay with Obama here, going though to South Carolina, where Obama, of course, was campaigning last weekend. He got a big endorsement out of South Carolina yesterday from Dick Harpootlian, the former state Democratic Party chairman. Harpootlian and Obama met actually on Friday when Obama was doing a 2-day visit to South Carolina over the weekend. And his endorsement, Harpootlian's endorsement, comes as Hillary Clinton yesterday was campaigning in the state of South Carolina. He said, Harpootlian said, quote, "I see in Barack Obama the same magnetism I saw in Bill Clinton." A little background, though. Dick Harpootlian was a very good friend and had worked very closely with President Bill Clinton during the 1990s, but he's never been a huge fan of Hillary Clinton's, actually calling her a relatively polarizing figure who would have a lot of difficulty winning in states like South Carolina, and also the other Democratic candidate, John Edwards. Harpootlian and Edwards never particularly close either. Both of them are trial lawyers in a sort of an industry that's notoriously competitive, so the two of them never close. Not to take away anything from the from Obama's appeal or from Harpootlian's rationale for getting behind Obama, but there do seem to be some other reasons possibly for Harpootlian getting behind him. All right, staying in South Carolina, finally this from the Associated Press, where Hillary Clinton is continuing to face questions about a story that we brought you here first at the hotline last week, questions about whether her campaign traded money for the endorsement of a prominent black state senator in South Carolina, very influential among black politicians in the state. Specifically, we reported, and a lot of other media organizations have followed up, negotiated a consulting contract with State Senator Darrell Jackson, who had endorsed John Edwards in 2004. Soon after he endorsed her campaign, Jackson admitted that his media consulting firm received a $10,000 a month contract from Clinton's campaign. In an interview with the AP, Clinton denied that there was any sort of quid pro quo in this sort of situation. She said, "Senator Jackson was somebody who was involved in my husband's campaigns. He was someone we turned to for political advice and counsel." So sort of working in the fact that that Jackson and the Clintons go back a lot farther than just this campaign, having worked together during the 1990s. Also in South Carolina, though, she said that the state should remove this Confederate flag, joining a lot of other Democratic candidates in saying that the state should remove the Confederate flag from the State House grounds, but framing it in sort of a question of patriotism, saying that during a time of war, the country should unite behind one flag, and that flag, of course, should not be the Confederate flag. So that's all, Rob.
All right, John Mercurio over at Hotline. Thank you very much.
Thanks.